A piece of fruit falls from a tree. Days later, its skin begins to split. Tiny bubbles appear beneath the surface. The sweet smell changes. Nobody touched it. Nobody brewed it. Yet something remarkable has happened. The fruit now contains alcohol. Not because humans made it, but because nature did. Which makes one question almost impossible to ignore. If alcohol is poisonous, why did nearly every civilization on Earth spend thousands of years learning how to make even more of it? The story begins with one of the smallest living things on Earth, yeast. These microscopic fungi are everywhere, floating through the air, clinging to fruit, waiting for sugar. The moment they find it, they begin feeding. And as they do, they release ethanol, the same alcohol found in beer, wine, and whiskey. This process wasn't invented. It has been happening for millions of years. Every season, ripe fruit falls onto the forest floor. Some of it begins to ferment naturally. Humans aren't the only animals that notice. Chimpanzees eat fermented fruit. Spider monkeys actively search for it. Elephants have been observed becoming intoxicated after feeding on overripe fruit. Even some birds consume fermented berries. At first, that seems like an evolutionary disaster. Why would any animal be attracted to something intoxicating? One of the leading explanations is known as the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. For our primate ancestors, the smell of ethanol wasn't a danger signal. It was a shortcut. Fermentation only begins when fruit is packed with sugar. Following that scent often meant finding one of the richest food sources in the forest. Alcohol wasn't the reward, sugar was. But following fermenting fruit created a new challenge. If your favorite food now contained a toxin, your body needed a way to survive it. Today, your liver contains an enzyme called ADH4. Its job is simple: break down ethanol before it causes too much damage. For a long time, scientists assumed this enzyme had always worked the same way. Then, researchers compared the DNA of living primates. The results were surprising. Around 10 million years ago, our ancestors evolved a version of ADH4 that processed alcohol about 40 times more efficiently than before. The timing wasn't random. Around the same period, our ancestors spent less time living in trees and more time searching for food on the ground. That's exactly where fallen fruit collected, and fallen fruit had often already begun to ferment. Individuals who could safely digest small amounts of alcohol gained access to food that others struggled to use. Generation after generation, that advantage spread. By the time humans appeared, our bodies were already familiar with ethanol. The real breakthrough came much later, not when we found alcohol, but when we learned how to control the process that created it. Nobody knows who made the first alcoholic drink, because they almost certainly weren't trying to. A container filled with crushed fruit is forgotten for a few days, or a bowl of honey is left out after the rain. Nothing seems unusual. Then something changes. Tiny bubbles appear. The smell becomes sharper. The liquid begins to fizz. To the people watching, it must have looked almost supernatural. Today we know exactly what was happening. Wild yeast drifting through the air had landed on the mixture. It began feeding on the sugar, transforming it into ethanol and carbon dioxide. No one could see the organisms responsible. No one even knew they existed. Yet the results were impossible to ignore. The drink tasted different. More importantly, it made people feel different. That's all early humans needed to know. The process was repeated, not because they understood fermentation, but because they had discovered that it was predictable. The ingredients could change: fruit, honey, later grain. But the invisible chemistry stayed the same. That was the real breakthrough. Not the invention of alcohol, but the realization that a natural process could be repeated whenever people wanted. At first glance, brewing makes very little sense. Growing grain took months of work. So why use part of the harvest to make alcohol instead of more bread? One answer may have been surprisingly practical. Water wasn't always safe. Streams carried parasites. Standing water collected dangerous bacteria. Drinking from the wrong place could be deadly. Brewing changed that. The water had to be heated. The finished drink became much less hospitable to many harmful microbes. Ancient beer wasn't identical to the one we know today. It contained far less alcohol. It was often cloudy, closer to a nutritious fermented porridge than a modern lager. For many communities, it wasn't an occasional luxury. It was part of everyday life. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient breweries beside sites used for enormous communal feasts. Places where hundreds of people gathered to celebrate, to trade, to bury their dead, to build together. Some researchers have even proposed a bold idea. Perhaps the desire to brew beer encouraged people to cultivate more grain, helping agriculture spread faster. The idea is still debated. But one thing is clear. Alcohol became far more than a drink. It became a reason for people to gather. Think about one of the hardest problems early humans faced. Not hunting, not farming. Trust. Your closest friends were family. Everyone else could become a rival or a threat. Yet villages kept growing. Strangers began living together, trading together, working together. How? Modern neuroscience offers an intriguing clue. Alcohol temporarily lowers activity in brain regions linked to fear and social vigilance. People become more willing to talk, laugh, share, trust. Anthropologists have noticed something remarkable. Across cultures, drinking almost never happens alone. It happens in groups, around fires, at celebrations, during weddings, after successful hunts. The drink mattered, but the ritual may have mattered even more. Sharing alcohol wasn't simply about becoming intoxicated. It was about proving something. I'm safe. So are you. Some researchers believe these shared rituals help transform small bands of relatives into much larger human communities. The evidence is still debated, but if they're right, alcohol didn't just change how people felt. It changed who they were willing to trust. If alcohol makes us slower, less coordinated, and less aware of danger, why can the first drink feel so good? The answer lies inside the brain. Alcohol doesn't activate a single switch. It changes several communication systems at once. One of the first is GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. Think of it as the nervous system's brake pedal. When alcohol strengthens GABA's effects, neurons fire less frequently. Anxiety drops, muscles relax. The constant mental noise becomes quieter. At the same time, another system responds, dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. Its release tells the brain, this experience matters. That's why alcohol can feel pleasurable, even while it's placing stress on the body. It's not because the brain wants poison. It's because alcohol temporarily hijacks circuits that evolved to reinforce useful behaviors, like eating, social bonding, and survival. The chemistry is ancient, the drink is ancient, but humans eventually learned to turn both into culture. At first, this looks like the story of a drink. It isn't. It's the story of a pattern humans have repeated throughout history. We didn't create fermentation. Yeast had been doing that for millions of years. We didn't create fire. We learned how to keep it burning. We didn't create rivers. We learned how to guide them. Again and again, our greatest inventions weren't completely new ideas. They were natural processes, understood, controlled, and eventually transformed into technology. Alcohol became one of the earliest examples. Humans discovered that one invisible organism, working on sugar, could preserve food, create new flavors, and change the way people gathered together. The invention wasn't alcohol, it was learning how to make nature work on command. The next time you see a glass of beer or a bottle of wine, you're looking at something far older than civilization. Long before cities, long before kings, long before the first written language, yeast was already quietly turning sugar into alcohol inside fallen fruit. Our ancestors didn't set out to invent a new drink. They noticed a pattern. They experimented, they repeated it, and little by little, a simple accident became one of humanity's oldest technologies. Perhaps that's always been our greatest advantage. Not stronger muscles, not sharper teeth, but the ability to recognize nature's hidden rules and use them in ways no other species ever could. Every civilization has discovered fire. Every civilization has discovered tools. And almost every civilization has discovered alcohol. Not because people around the world thought the same way, but because they were all observing the same planet and learning to speak its language.